Dear listeners, thank you for your incredible support in helping our channel grow. We're aiming for 1,000 subscribers, so please support us by subscribing and helping us reach this milestone. Now let's start the story. James Brenner stood at the edge of the veranda, watching the Montana sunset bathe the sky in hues of amber and gold. A meticulous man, he had spent 15 years building a successful architecture firm from the ground up. The rugged landscape before him, with its perfect balance of strength and elegance, reminded him of what had first drawn him to design. The sprawling vacation home they had rented for the family reunion belonged to his father-in-law, William Blackwell, a man who had made his fortune in luxury real estate and never missed an opportunity to remind others of it. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice belonged to Maxine, his wife of 7 years, who slipped beside him with a champagne flute in hand. Once a passionate artist who had captivated him with her creativity and free spirit, Maxine had changed over the years. Her dreams of pursuing art had been abandoned for a position at her father's company, her independence replaced by a growing deference to her family's expectations. "It is," James replied, noticing how rare these quiet moments had become. "Reminds me of that trip to Glacier National Park before we were married. Remember that cabin?" She smiled, but the warmth didn't reach her eyes. "That tiny place. God, we've come a long way since then." The moment was shattered by William's booming voice calling from inside. "Maxine, come see what Donald brought us from Paris." Donald Parker, William's right-hand man at Blackwell Luxury Properties, and the golden boy who could do no wrong. James had never trusted his polished smile or the way his eyes lingered on Maxine during family gatherings. "Coming, Daddy." Maxine's entire demeanor shifted, shoulders straightening, voice brightening. She downed her champagne and hurried inside without a backward glance. James sighed and followed. The vast vacation home was teeming with Blackwell family members and business associates, all revolving around William like planets around a sun. In a corner, James's parents, Rena and Francis Brenner, sat awkwardly on an extravagant sofa, their modest backgrounds as former school teachers making them feel out of place among the ostentatious displays of wealth. James's mother waved him over. "Your father was just saying he'd love to see those new blueprints you're working on. The Henderson project?" James smiled, grateful for the familiar territory. "It's a sustainable design. Uses about 40% less energy than comparable buildings." "Sustainable?" William's voice boomed as he approached, tumbler of scotch in hand. "That hippie nonsense doesn't sell premium property, son. People want luxury gold fixtures, marble countertops, not solar panels." He laughed, several guests chuckling along obediently. "Actually," James kept his voice steady, "eco-friendly designs are commanding top dollar in today's market." The Henderson project sold. "Donald closed the Westlake deal yesterday," William interrupted, clapping the younger man on the shoulder as he joined them. "Biggest commission in company history." "Congratulations," James said flatly. Donald's smile was polished to perfection. Just following the Blackwell philosophy, go big or go home. His eyes drifted to Maxine as she approached with fresh drinks. Something in their brief exchange of glances made James's stomach tighten. "Speaking of philosophy," William continued, "when are you going to stop playing with your little firm and come work for a real company? I've got clients who'd pay double what those eco-warriors are offering you." Before James could respond, William's wife, Vivian, called everyone to dinner. The massive dining table gleamed with crystal and silver, William taking his place at the head like a king presiding over his court. "Beautiful table, Vivian," Rena Brenner said kindly. "Thank you," Vivian replied with minimal acknowledgement. "Our housekeeper spent hours arranging it. I simply can't stand anything less than perfection." Dinner proceeded with William dominating the conversation: business deals, political connections, and not-so-subtle reminders of his generosity in hosting everyone. James noticed Donald engaging Maxine repeatedly, their whispered conversations punctuated by her soft laughter. "Remember our trip to Maui, Donald?" William reminisced. "When you negotiated that beachfront property right out from under those Japanese investors. How could I forget?" Donald raised his glass. The look on their faces alone was worth the price. "That's what separates winners from losers," William declared, eyes flicking toward James with open disdain. "Knowing when to strike without mercy." After dinner, the group moved to the expansive living room, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the mountains. William showcased his latest acquisitions, an antique pocket watch, a limited-edition bourbon, and custom-made Italian shoes he claimed cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Handcrafted by third-generation artisans," William explained, holding up the leather shoes with their distinctive red soles. "Only 50 pairs made each year." James excused himself to use the restroom, needing a break from William's endless self-aggrandizement. As he walked down the hallway, He overheard voices coming from a partially open door. Maxine and Donald speaking in hushed tones. "You're taking too many risks," Maxine whispered. "James almost walked in on us yesterday." "Let him," Donald replied coolly. "Your father would destroy his career with one phone call if he tried anything. Just be patient. Once everything's in place." James stepped back, his heart pounding. He had suspected something, but hearing it confirmed sent ice through his veins. Before he could process what he had heard, his phone rang. A client dealing with an emergency at a construction site. James took the call, his mind racing with the implications of what he had just discovered. When he returned to the living room, he found Maxine sitting uncomfortably close to Donald, while William continued bragging about his prized shoes. "James, darling," Maxine called, her tone overly bright. "Come join us. Donald was just telling us about his sailing trip through the Greek islands." The rest of the evening blurred by enforced smiles and strained conversation, while James cataloged every interaction between Maxine and Donald: the shared glances, the casual touches, the private jokes. How had he been so blind? Morning brought no clarity. James woke early and went for a run, pushing himself harder than usual as he tried to make sense of his swirling thoughts. When he returned, the house was bustling with activity. William had planned a hike to a scenic viewpoint followed by lunch at an exclusive mountain restaurant accessible only by private road. Maxine approached as he drank his coffee on the patio. "You disappeared early. Everything okay?" "Just clearing my head," James replied, studying her face for any signs of guilt. "How did you sleep?" "Fine," she answered too quickly, her eyes shifting away. "Dad wants everyone ready to leave in 30 minutes. He had arranged for guides and everything." "Of course he has." James couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. Maxine frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. I'll be ready." The hiking party gathered on time, with William leading the way in pristine outdoor gear that looked as though it had never touched dirt. Donald stood beside Maxine, both dressed in matching outfits that seemed more suited for a sporting goods catalog than a real hike. "The guide says it's about 2 hours up and 1 hour back," William announced. "Spectacular views at the summit. I've arranged for champagne and hors d'oeuvres at the viewpoint." James's parents chose to stay behind, Francis's knee flaring up from old football injuries. "You go ahead, son," his father said quietly. "Your mother and I will enjoy the peace and quiet." The trail started off easy, winding back and forth along the mountainside. Despite everything, James found the natural beauty: calming ancient pines, wildflowers in unexpected places, and occasional glimpses of distant peaks through the trees. He hiked alone, deliberately lagging behind the main group, where William was loudly lecturing everyone about local geology despite knowing next to nothing about it. Ahead, James watched Maxine and Donald hiking side by side, their heads bent in conversation. At one point, when they thought no one was looking, Donald's hand brushed against Maxine's, lingering far longer than could be considered accidental. By the time they reached the summit, James's mood had darkened like the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The view was undeniably breathtaking, a sweeping panorama of mountains, valleys, and a silver river winding below. A guide was already setting up a portable table with champagne and appetizers. No expense spared for William's extravagant display of wealth in the wilderness. "Worth every step," William proclaimed, popping the champagne with a theatrical flourish. "Nothing but the best for my family and friends." Everyone gathered around, offering the expected oohs and ahs. James stood apart, watching how easily Donald fit into the scene, playing the role of the devoted son William had always wanted. "James, you look like someone stole your favorite toy," William called out. "Come have some champagne. Might loosen you up for once." "I'm fine," James replied, his gaze fixed on the landscape. "The view from the top is always better when you've earned it," Donald added with a smug smile. "Some people never make it this high." The double meaning wasn't lost on James. The group lingered at the summit for nearly an hour before William announced it was time to head down for their lunch reservation. The descent started smoothly enough, but the changing weather had left the trail slick in places. William walked ahead with Donald, animatedly discussing some investment opportunity. James found himself behind Maxine, watching her navigate her steps down a particularly steep section. The trail narrowed between two large boulders, forcing them to proceed single file onto a muddy patch. What happened next unfolded in seconds. James's foot slipped slightly on the wet ground, and he instinctively reached out to steady himself. His hand accidentally knocked against William, who was navigating the narrow passage. William stumbled into a muddy puddle, his prized Italian shoes sinking into the muck. William spun around, his face contorted with rage. "You clumsy idiot," he shouted. "Look what you've done." "It was an accident," James said, regaining his balance. "I slipped on the..." The slap came without warning. William's open palm struck James's cheek with surprising force for a man his age, the sharp sound echoing in the sudden silence. "How dare you touch my shoes, you disgusting man!" William shouted, his face flushed with fury. "They're worth more than you. Clean my shoes and get lost." James stood frozen, the sting on his cheek nothing compared to the shock flooding his system. The entire hiking party had stopped, their eyes fixed on the confrontation with uncomfortable silence. Donald made no effort to hide his smirk. "Dad?" Maxine finally spoke, but not with the anger or outrage James expected. Instead, her voice was laced with embarrassment and deference. "James, apologize to him right now." The words hit harder than the slap. James looked at his wife, the woman who had once vowed to stand by him through anything, now siding with her father after he had been physically assaulted. "Apologize," James repeated, his voice dangerously calm. "For an accident? Just do it," Maxine hissed. "You know how much those shoes mean to him." James looked from his wife to William, then down at the mud-splattered shoes that were supposedly worth more than his dignity. Something cold and unyielding crystallized inside him. "I think I've apologized enough in this family," he said at last. Without another word, he turned and continued down the mountain alone, ignoring Maxine's calls fading behind him. At the trailhead, he borrowed one of the guests' phones to call a taxi and left a brief note for his parents, explaining he'd been called away on urgent business. 3 hours later, he was on a flight home, the humiliation still burning but gradually hardening into something else, a calm, focused resolve that would have terrified anyone who truly knew him. The empty house greeted James with blessed silence. For 3 days, he moved through its rooms like a ghost, ignoring Maxine's increasingly angry calls and messages. She and her family would be returning in 2 days, expecting explanations and apologies. They would receive neither. On the third morning, James drove to his firm's downtown office. His business partner and oldest friend, Nadia Chun, looked up in surprise as he entered. "I thought you were still in Montana," she said, her sharp eyes studying his expression. "What happened?" James closed her office door and told her everything. The humiliation, Maxine's betrayal, the affair with Donald. Nadia listened without interruption, her features hardening as the story unfolded. "That explains the calls," she said when he finished. "William Blackwell's office has been trying to reach you through the firm. Said it was about a potential collaboration." "No collaboration. No reconciliation. No second chances," James said with quiet certainty. "I'm filing for divorce." "James." Nadia's expression softened. "Take some time to think. 7 years of marriage." "I've been thinking for 20 hours. On planes and in this empty house," he replied. "What would you do if someone slapped you in front of everyone you know, then demanded you clean their shoes?" Nadia's response was immediate. "I'd make them regret it." "Exactly." James placed a flash drive on her desk. "I need your help with something else. This contains the last 5 years of my personal financial records. I need to know what rights Maxine has to my firm, my designs, my patents, and how to protect all of it." "You think she'll come after your work?" "I think William will use every connection he has to destroy me when I refuse to crawl back begging for forgiveness. I need to be ready." Nadia nodded, her resolve matching his. As the daughter of immigrants who had built a successful restaurant business only to lose it through a predatory contract, she understood the need for protection all too well. "I'll have answers by tomorrow," she promised. "What else do you need information on?" James asked. "Everything you can find about Donald Parker, his relationship with the Blackwell family, business connections, property holdings, potential vulnerabilities." Nadia warned. "James, don't do something you'll regret." "I won't," he said, his face calm. "But they knocked me down. Let's see how they handle the fall." That afternoon, James drove to his parents' modest suburban home. They had returned early from Montana after his sudden departure, concerned about what had happened. "He hit you?" His father's weathered face reddened with anger as James finished explaining. "And Maxine took his side?" "She did." James accepted the coffee his mother handed him. "I'm filing for divorce." Rena Brenner let out a heavy sigh. "I never wanted to say it, but that family was poisoning you both from the start. The way they looked down on us, on your work. We should have spoken up sooner," Francis added. "But you seemed happy, and we didn't want to interfere." "It's not your fault," James assured them. "But I need to ask you something important. When the divorce becomes public, William might try to hurt me by going after the people I care about. That includes you. What are you planning, son?" Francis's eyes narrowed with concern. "Nothing illegal. Nothing that crosses any moral lines I can't live with," James promised. "But I won't let them humiliate me and walk away unscathed." His parents exchanged looks, the kind of silent communication only possible between two people who had built their lives on mutual respect. "We taught you right from wrong," Francis said firmly. "We trust you to remember the difference. And we taught you to stand up for yourself," Rena added, her voice steady. "Whatever happens, we're on your side." Back home, James spent the evening poring over old files, emails, and photographs from his years with Maxine. In a rarely accessed folder, he found exactly what he'd been searching for: evidence of a project from 4 years ago when he designed an eco-friendly resort for a client who later sold the property to Blackwell Luxury Properties. The design had suspiciously reappeared in modified form within one of Williams' developments 6 months later. James had suspected theft of his intellectual property, but couldn't prove it at the time. Now, with renewed clarity and motivation, he began connecting dots he'd previously overlooked: names on contracts, shell companies, suspicious timing of transactions. Every discovery fed the cold determination growing within him. His phone rang. Maxine. This time, he answered. Where are you? She demanded. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was explaining your disappearance to everyone? More embarrassing than watching your father slap your husband and demand he clean his shoes? James's voice remained calm, perfectly controlled. You're overreacting. You know how Dad gets when his things are damaged. And you know Donald Parker intimately, don't you, Maxine? The silence on the other end confirmed everything. James, I don't know what you think you heard. We'll talk when you get home. He cut her off. All the cards on the table. No more pretending. James ended the call and worked late into the night, methodically building a foundation for what was to come. When exhaustion finally claimed him, he slept soundly for the first time since Montana, the sleep of a man who had found his purpose. Maxine returned home alone 2 days later, wheeling her designer luggage into the foyer with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned traveler. James watched from the living room doorway as Maxine glanced around, finally noticing the changes. Missing photographs, rearranged furniture, and an emptiness that signaled transition. What's going on? She dropped her purse on the entry table. Where are all our photos? In storage, James replied calmly. Along with anything else I thought you might want to take. Maxine's carefully maintained composure slipped. Hey, what are you talking about? Sit down, Maxine. We need to talk. She followed him into the living room, perching uneasily on the edge of the sofa. James remained standing, maintaining the psychological upper hand. If you're still upset about my father. This isn't about your father, James interrupted. Though his actions were the final confirmation of what I've suspected for months: that our marriage is a sham. That you've been sleeping with Donald Parker. That you and your family have never respected me or what I've built. Maxine's face shifted through shock, denial, and finally, a cold calculation that reminded him all too much of William. You can't prove anything about Donald, she said at last. I don't need to prove it in court, Maxine. We both know it's true. James placed a manila folder on the coffee table between them. These are divorce papers. My lawyer will contact yours tomorrow. I'm offering a clean break. You keep what you brought into the marriage. I keep what I built. Just like that. 7 years thrown away over one argument? It wasn't one argument. It was the moment you showed me exactly where I stand in your family's hierarchy. James kept his gaze steady, his voice calm. Somewhere below a pair of Italian shoes. Maxine's expression hardened, the mask of the perfect wife falling away. Dad was right about you. No ambition. No understanding of what real power looks like. Maybe. Or maybe I just define success differently. You'll regret this. She rose to her feet. When Dad finds out. He already knows, James cut her off. I called him this morning. For the first time, genuine surprise crossed her face. You what? We had a very illuminating conversation. He explained that my position in this family has always been conditional. That true Blackwells know how to fall in line. James smiled without warmth. I explained that Brenners know how to stand their ground. What else did you say to him? Maxine's voice carried a hint of uncertainty. That's between your father and me. But I think you'll find he's surprisingly open to a quiet, civilized divorce. It wasn't exactly a lie. James had spoken to William, though he left out the part about recording the conversation, capturing William's threats, admissions about interfering in James's business relationships, and several careless remarks about tax schemes that would certainly interest federal authorities. I don't believe you, Maxine said, but her confidence was slipping. Call him. She did, retreating to the kitchen for privacy. James could still hear her voice rising from disbelief to anger, then dipping into a kind of pleading that told him William hadn't offered the unconditional support she expected. When she returned, her expression was cold and calculating. Fine. You want a divorce? We'll get a divorce. But don't expect it to be as simple as you think. I've contributed to this household, to your career. By sleeping with your father's right-hand man? James raised an eyebrow. That's a contribution I could have done without. You self-righteous scumsucker, Maxine spat. You think you're so morally superior? Let's see how superior you feel when you're starting over with nothing. I started with nothing once before, James replied calmly. The difference is, this time I know exactly who my enemies are. Maxine left that evening, taking only a suitcase of essentials and the keys to her separate car. As soon as she drove away, James changed the house locks, then called Nadia. It's done, he said when she answered. She's moved out. How's our other project coming? Better than expected, Nadia replied. You need to see this in person. How soon can you get to the office? An hour later, James stood in Nadia's office, examining the documents spread across her conference table. Donald Parker isn't just William's employee, Nadia explained, pointing to a complex chart of business connections. He's been strategically placed into key positions throughout Blackwell's companies. And here's the interesting part: his real estate license was suspended for 6 months 3 years ago for ethical violations in another state. Conveniently, that little detail is missing from his Blackwell company bio, which means he was operating without proper credentials when he closed some of these deals. James studied the timeline closely. Exactly. And there's more. Nadia slid another folder forward. That resort design you mentioned? I found patent application documents filed by Blackwell Properties that mirror your original work. They were submitted just 2 weeks after you showed the designs to Maxine. James felt a surge of cold satisfaction. Can you get me a meeting with Thomas Hammond? Nadia raised an eyebrow. The real estate commissioner? That might take some doing. Use my connection with his daughter. I redesigned their family home last year. He owes me a favor. In the weeks that followed, James moved swiftly. He sold their shared house, reinvesting the proceeds into a smaller property solely in his name. He restructured his firm to shield it from potential litigation and kept a low profile, avoiding the social circles where he might cross paths with the Blackwell family or their many allies. Meanwhile, Maxine's initially quiet departure evolved into increasingly hostile legal attacks. Her attorney, one of William's preferred sharks, filed motions demanding half of James's business assets, claiming she had been an integral consultant on his major projects. James had anticipated this. When the court ordered financial discovery, he was prepared with 5 years of meticulously documented work records proving Maxine had contributed exactly 0 hours to his firm's projects. Her name appeared on no design documents, no client meetings, no internal communications. They're getting desperate, Nadia observed after a particularly aggressive hearing. William must have expected you to crumble immediately. People like William mistake kindness for weakness, James replied. They're used to everyone backing down. What's our next move? James checked his watch. I have a lunch meeting with Commissioner Hammond. Let's see if our theory about Donald Parker's licensing issues holds up. The meeting exceeded James's expectations. Hammond, a no-nonsense public servant known for his integrity, listened carefully to James's concerns about possible licensing violations at Blackwell Properties. I can't promise anything based on personal connections, Hammond warned. But if what you're suggesting is true, it warrants investigation. Send me the documentation, and I'll make sure it reaches the right people. I'll have it to you by tomorrow, James promised. That evening, as James compiled the evidence for Hammond, his doorbell rang. Standing on his porch was Vivian Blackwell, William's wife and Maxine's mother. Her usual imperious demeanor was subdued. May I come in? She asked. James hesitated, then stepped aside. Briefly, Vivian settled uneasily on his sofa, looking out of place amid the simplicity of his deliberately modest new home. I won't waste time with pleasantries. What do you want to end this vendetta against my family? Vivian's tone was sharp, her usual elegance fraying at the edges. Vendetta? James raised an eyebrow. I'm simply protecting what's mine while pursuing a divorce initiated by your daughter's actions. Don't play innocent, Vivian snapped. The real estate commission's investigation, the tax audit, William suddenly has to deal with. You're behind all of it. Name your price. James studied her carefully. There is no price, Vivian. I'm not looking for a payoff. Everyone has a price, she insisted. Is it the Henderson project? William can make those environmental approvals disappear overnight. That would be illegal. Don't be naive. This is how the world works. For a moment, her perfectly maintained facade cracked. William will destroy you if you continue this. He already tried, James replied evenly. Tell him I said hello. After she left, James called Nadia. Vivian just paid me a visit. They know about the commission investigation. That was fast. Nadia sounded concerned. Watch your back, James. These people don't play fair. Neither do I. Not anymore. The Real Estate Commission's investigation into Donald Parker's licensing irregularities made headlines the following week. Local business publications ran with the story. Rising star at Blackwell Properties facing scrutiny over potentially unauthorized transactions worth millions. James was reviewing preliminary designs for a new project when his office door swung open. Donald Parker stormed in, his face red with fury. You think you're clever, don't you? Donald snarled, digging through ancient history to find technical violations. James calmly set down his pencil. This is private property. You weren't invited. Drop the investigation, Donald demanded, advancing toward the desk. Whatever twisted revenge you're after, because Maxine chose the better man. Better man. James couldn't help but laugh. Is that what you tell yourself? That she chose you? Not that you were just a convenient pawn in William's attempt to control his daughter's life? Donald's expression wavered, uncertainty flickering before arrogance returned. You know nothing about our relationship. I know enough. James stood, matching Donald's height. I know you've been operating without proper licensing. I know you've been involved in misappropriating intellectual property. And I know William will throw you to the wolves the moment you become a liability. You're making powerful enemies, Donald warned. William has connections you can't even imagine. And yet, here you are doing his dirty work while he keeps his hands clean. James moved around the desk. Ask yourself, Donald, when this all comes crashing down, who will William protect? His daughter's lover or his own reputation? For a moment, Donald seemed genuinely rattled. Then, his bravado reasserted itself. This isn't over. We're just getting started, James replied, holding the door open pointedly. After Donald left, James immediately called his attorney to document the confrontation. Then he returned to his work, his focus sharper than ever. The preliminary moves were in place. Now, it was time to accelerate. That evening, James met with Roger Tompkins, a seasoned investigative journalist who had spent decades covering real estate development in the city. They settled into a quiet corner of a downtown bar, a place well outside the Blackwell social circle. Interesting timing, Tompkins remarked, swirling his scotch. I've been trying to dig into Blackwell's operations for years. Suddenly, I get an anonymous tip about licensing irregularities, and then your call offering an exclusive interview. Coincidences happen. They do, James replied neutrally. Sure they do, Tompkins said, his skepticism clear. What's your angle, Brenner? Divorce proceedings getting messy? This isn't about my divorce, James said firmly. It's about business practices that harm legitimate competitors and consumers. The Real Estate Commission is already investigating Donald Parker. I'm just providing some context. Over the next hour, James laid out a thorough case, presenting evidence of Blackwell Properties' habit of acquiring designs from smaller firms and then reproducing them with only minor alterations. He included documentation showing his own intellectual property being used without credit or compensation. James described how William Blackwell's empire was built not through innovation, but through absorption and intimidation. Most of this isn't technically illegal, Tompkins noted. Unethical, sure, but keep digging, James urged. The licensing issue is just a thread. Pull on it hard enough, and you might unravel the whole sweater. Why now? Why you? The journalist's gaze was probing. You had to know that marrying into that family meant playing by their rules. Maybe I believed people could change, James admitted. Or maybe I didn't understand the rules until recently. The article appeared 3 days later, a seemingly balanced profile of Blackwell Properties that nevertheless raised troubling questions about their business practices, licensing compliance, and the thin line between aggressive acquisition and outright predatory behavior. Donald Parker featured prominently, with his meteoric rise through the company ranks juxtaposed against his prior licensing suspension. The fallout was immediate. William called James directly for the first time since Montana. You ungrateful little, William snarled, dispensing with any pretense of civility. After everything I've done for you. Done for me? James kept his voice measured. Like what exactly? Belittling my business, insulting my parents, slapping me in front of my wife because I accidentally touched your precious shoes? One incident blown completely out of proportion, William scoffed. Men of our position have disagreements. You're supposed to handle them with dignity, not run to the press dredging up ancient history. I didn't mention the slap to anyone, James pointed out. Interesting that you immediately linked it to the article. William's voice lowered, now dripping with menace. Listen carefully. You have 24 hours to issue a public statement retracting your accusations and apologizing for the misunderstanding. Otherwise, I will personally ensure your firm never lands another major contract in this state. That sounds like blacklisting, James replied coolly, which, as your lawyers have surely mentioned, is illegal under both state and federal law. Don't lecture me about. No, you listen. James cut him off, his calm finally giving way to frustration. You created this situation. You raised your daughter to believe status matters more than integrity. You welcomed a man like Donald into your business despite knowing his past. You responded to a simple accident with physical violence and demanded I clean your shoes like a servant. It was a moment of anger, William protested, his bluster wavering. It was a revelation, James corrected, his voice cold and unyielding. A revelation of who you are, who Maxine has become, and what your family truly stands for. I'm not retracting anything, William. The truth is the truth. James ended the call and immediately forwarded the recording to his attorney with instructions to keep it secure unless necessary. Then, he called Nadia. Williams rattled, he reported. The commissioner's investigation must be turning up something significant. That's not all, Nadia replied. I just got off the phone with Sylvia Velez. Sylvia was a former employee of Blackwell Properties who had left under unclear circumstances 2 years prior. James had reached out to her weeks ago, hoping she could shed light on the company's internal operations. She's ready to talk, Nadia continued. Not just about Donald's licensing issues, about systematic fraud, manipulated property valuations, altered environmental impact reports, and bribes to planning officials. She has documentation, James. For the first time since Montana, James felt a genuine flicker of surprise. Why now? Why didn't she come forward before? Blackwell had her sign an NDA with a massive penalty clause. She was scared. Nadia paused. But the commission's investigation changed things. She says if there's already an official inquiry, her information counts as whistleblower testimony and is legally protected. Is she willing to go on the record with Tompkins? Under certain conditions, yes. James leaned back, his mind racing through the implications. Set it up. And Nadia makes sure she has solid legal representation before she says anything publicly. William won't take this lying down. The next phase unfolded faster than James anticipated. Sylvia Velez's revelations, carefully vetted and thoroughly documented, expanded the commission's investigation beyond Donald Parker to the broader practices of Blackwell Properties. Tompkins published a follow-up article that sent shockwaves through the real estate community. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings reached a critical juncture. Maxine's attorney abruptly shifted strategies, dropping demands for James's business assets in favor of a quick settlement. The timing was no coincidence. William needed to distance his daughter from the escalating scrutiny surrounding Blackwell Properties. James received the revised settlement offer at his office. As he reviewed the surprisingly reasonable terms, his intercom buzzed. James, his assistant's voice sounded strained. Maxine Blackwell is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment. He hesitated before making a decision. Send her in. Maxine entered, looking nothing like the polished, confident woman who had walked out of their home weeks earlier. Dark shadows clung under her eyes, and tension radiated from her posture. This has gone far enough, she said without preamble. Sign the settlement. End this war before it destroys everything. Hello to you too, Maxine. James gestured to a chair, which she ignored. Don't play games, she snapped. You've made your point. You're not the pushover Dad thought you were. Congratulations. Now stop before people get hurt. People already got hurt, James reminded her. Your father made his choices. Donald made his. And you made yours. It wasn't what you think with Donald, she said, her composure cracking. It was complicated. No, it really wasn't. James's voice remained steady. You chose status over loyalty. You chose your father's approval over standing by your husband when he was physically assaulted. Those aren't complicated choices, Maxine. They're revealing ones. She stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. I never thought you'd fight like this. The James the first knew was reasonable, compromising. The James you knew thought he was part of a family, not a corporate hierarchy, he corrected. As for the settlement, my attorney will review it and respond accordingly. Dad's under investigation by the IRS now, she said, shifting tactics. Did you know they're questioning transactions going back 5 years? His health isn't good, James. The stress could kill him. William made his own bed. James replied without sympathy. I'm not responsible for the consequences of his actions. What happened to you? Maxine asked, genuine bewilderment in her voice. When did you become so cold? I'm not cold, James said quietly. I'm just done pretending. Done accepting disrespect as the price of belonging to your family. Done watching people like your father and Donald build empires by trampling over others. You won't win this, she warned, moving toward the door. Dad always comes out on top. We'll see. After she left, James stared down at the settlement papers. The terms were surprisingly favorable, a clean break with minimal financial entanglement. James should have felt victorious, but instead, he felt hollow, wondering if the man he had been before Montana would even recognize the man he had become. 3 months after the Montana incident, James's carefully orchestrated plan was nearing its culmination. The Real Estate Commission's investigation had grown into a joint inquiry with the State Attorney General's office, now focusing on potential fraud within Blackwell Properties. Donald Parker's license had been formally suspended pending the outcome, and Sylvia Velez's testimony had prompted other former employees to come forward with similar accounts of questionable practices. William Blackwell, once seen as unbeatable, was now facing trouble on all sides. Legal issues, money problems, and bad publicity. His company's stock dropped nearly 30%, and big clients were quietly pulling away. The powerful empire he built was finally starting to crumble. Throughout it all, James maintained a deliberately low profile, never commenting publicly on the investigations or his divorce proceedings. His firm continued to secure new projects smaller than before, but innovative and sustainable designs that were beginning to draw national attention. One crisp autumn morning, James arrived at his office to find Commissioner Hammond waiting with Nora. "This is an unexpected visit," James remarked, shaking the commissioner's hand. "An unofficial one," Hammond clarified. "What I'm about to share isn't public knowledge yet." They settled into the conference room, Hammond declining coffee. "The Attorney General is preparing to file formal charges against Blackwell Properties next week: fraud, licensing violations, falsification of documents, and attempted bribery of planning officials. It's a substantial list." James absorbed the news quietly. "Against the company or individuals?" "Both William Blackwell, Donald Parker, and 3 other executives are named specifically." Hammond studied James's reaction. "You don't seem surprised." "I've suspected the extent of the problems for some time," James admitted. Hammond leaned forward. "There's significant evidence that William Blackwell personally directed the misappropriation of your intellectual property, specifically the lakeside resort designs. The AG wants to include those charges, but they need your formal testimony." James glanced at Nadia, who gave him a subtle nod. "I'm not interested in personal revenge," he said carefully. "My goal was always to expose unethical business practices that harm consumers and legitimate competitors." "This isn't about revenge," Hammond countered. "It's about accountability. Without your testimony, one of the most serious charges may not hold up." James hesitated. "I'll need to think about it. This has already gone further than I initially intended." After Hammond left, Nadia closed the office door behind him. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Blackwell held accountable. "Yes," James admitted. "But criminal charge is possible jail time. That's more than I envisioned when this started." "They made their choices," Nadia reminded him, echoing his words to Maxine. "William didn't hesitate to threaten your livelihood, your reputation. Why protect him now?" Before James could respond, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. He answered cautiously. "James Brenner?" The voice belonged to a woman he didn't recognize. "This is Nurse Reyes at Memorial Hospital. You're listed as an emergency contact for Francis Brenner." A chill shot through James. "My father, what happened?" "He was brought in an hour ago after a car accident. He's stable, but I'm on my way." The drive to the hospital was a blur of anxiety. When James arrived, he found his mother in the waiting room, her face pale with worry. "The doctor says he'll be okay," Rena assured him before he could even ask. "Broken ribs, a concussion, some internal bruising. They're keeping him overnight for observation." "How did it happen?" James asked, his voice tight. "He was driving home from the hardware store," Rena explained, her voice trembling slightly. "A car ran a red light and hit him on the driver's side. The police said the other driver claimed his brakes failed." Something in her tone made James study her more closely. "You don't believe it was an accident?" The officer mentioned the other driver works for a property management company. Rena met his gaze, her eyes filled with worry. "Blackwell Properties." James sank heavily into a waiting room chair, a cold realization sweeping over him. "This is my fault. I pushed too hard, and now they're coming after the people I care about." "Don't you dare take that on," Rena said firmly. "If William Blackwell is behind this, and we don't know that he is, then it's his crime, not yours. I need to see Dad." Francis was awake but groggy from pain medication, his normally robust frame looking frail against the hospital bed. Bandages covered the left side of his face, and monitoring equipment beeped softly in the background. "There he is," Francis managed a weak smile. "Your mother's been fussing over me like it's just a paper cut. How are you feeling?" James asked, taking his father's hand carefully. "Like I got hit by a car," Francis joked weakly. "Which seems appropriate, considering." James swallowed hard. "Dad, I think this might be connected to my situation with William Blackwell. I figured as much when I saw the company logo on the kid's uniform." Francis's grip tightened slightly. "Listen to me, James. If they're resorting to this, it means you've got them on the ropes. Don't back down now. It's not worth your safety. Or Mom's. We never raised you to surrender when things get tough," Francis said, grimacing as he shifted positions. "Your mother and I can take care of ourselves. We'll be more careful, but we're not hiding." James left the hospital, his mind in turmoil. If William was truly behind the accident, it represented an escalation beyond anything James had expected. Legal maneuvers and business pressure were one thing, physical harm was something else entirely. He drove directly to his attorney's office, outlining his suspicions about the accident and requesting immediate legal action. By evening, a restraining order had been filed against William Blackwell, prohibiting any contact with James or his family. Police reports were updated to reflect the potential connection between the accident and ongoing legal disputes. James spent the night at his parents' home, arranging for additional security measures to be installed the following day. As dawn broke, he made 2 critical decisions. First, he would provide the testimony Commissioner Hammond had requested about the intellectual property theft. Second, he would accelerate the endgame of his plan, pushing William not just to accountability, but but to the brink of complete professional ruin. The next morning, James met with Roger Tompkins at a coffee shop near the newspaper offices. "I need everything you have on William's political connections," James said without preamble. "Specifically, donations to planning commission members who later approved Blackwell projects." Tompkins raised an eyebrow. "That's radioactive territory. Most of what I have is circumstantial patterns of donations followed by favorable decisions. Nothing definitive enough to print." "I'm not asking you to print it," James clarified. "I'm asking you to share your research with the Attorney General's office. Let them connect the dots officially." "This feels personal now," Tompkins observed. "What changed?" James considered how much to reveal. "My father was injured in a car accident yesterday. The driver works for Blackwell Properties." "Jesus." Tompkins looked genuinely shocked. "You think William ordered a hit?" "I think William believes himself unbeatable," James replied carefully. "Men like that don't recognize boundaries until they're forced to." The journalist studied him for a long moment. "I'll share what I have with the AG's office. But James, be careful. If William's willing to escalate to violence, even indirectly, you're in dangerous territory." "I know exactly where I stand," James assured him. "And so will William very soon." The final piece fell into place that afternoon when Sylvia Velez provided James's attorney with a previously undisclosed recording William Blackwell explicitly instructing Donald Parker to reproduce James's resort designs with minimal changes to avoid copyright issues. "I was saving it," Sylvia admitted during their conference call. "An insurance policy in case Blackwell came after me personally. But after hearing about your father's accident, someone needs to stop this man." James forwarded the recording to Commissioner Hammond with a brief message. "I'll testify. Schedule it as soon as possible." That evening, as James reviewed security footage from the new cameras at his parents' home, his doorbell rang. Standing on his porch, looking haggard and diminished, was Donald Parker. "We need to talk," Donald said nervously, glancing over his shoulder. "Not here. It's not safe." Against his better judgment, James agreed to meet at a public park 20 minutes later. He arrived first, choosing a bench with clear sight lines in all directions. Donald appeared precisely on time, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. "William knows I'm meeting you," Donald said immediately, sitting beside James, but keeping his eyes on the surroundings. "He's having me followed." "Why take the risk?" "Because I need protection." Donald's voice cracked slightly. "The AG's office questioned me for 6 hours yesterday. They have recordings, documents, witness testimony. William's going down, and he's trying to set me up as the fall guy." "You were a willing participant," James pointed out without sympathy. "I know," Donald admitted. "I'm not claiming innocence. But William's the mastermind. Every decision, every cut corner, every bribe, it all came from him." "What are you offering?" "Everything. Testimony about how William orchestrated the theft of your designs. Proof that he directed the falsification of environmental reports. Records of payments to planning officials." Donald leaned closer. "And confirmation that he ordered the accident involving your father." James's composure slipped for the first time. "You have proof of that?" "He didn't put it in writing," Donald said quickly. "But I was there when he made the call. Teach Brenner a lesson through the old man." Those were his exact words. "Why should I believe you now, after everything?" Donald laughed bitterly. "Self-preservation. William's sacrificing me to save himself. The only way I avoid years in prison is with a cooperation agreement. And for that, I need something valuable enough to trade. Like William's direct involvement in targeting my father." "Exactly." Donald glanced nervously around the park again. "I made a copy of William's private business calendar. It shows a meeting with a driver 2 days before the accident. A meeting with no legitimate business purpose. And Maxine?" James couldn't help asking. "Where does she stand in all this?" Donald's expression shifted to something almost like pity. "She suspected her father was behind the accident. That's what finally broke her loyalty. She's been cooperating with the AG's office for the past week." The revelation struck James harder than he anticipated. Despite everything, part of him had clung to the belief that Maxine was fully complicit in her father's schemes. "William doesn't know she's turned on him," Donald continued. "He still thinks she's the loyal daughter, standing by the family at all costs." "What do you want from me?" James asked finally. "Put in a word with the prosecutor," Donald replied without hesitation. "Tell them I came to you voluntarily with critical information. It could mean the difference between a reasonable plea deal and spending the next decade in prison." James stood, his decision made. "I'll consider it, but only after you've testified fully and truthfully about William's involvement in my father's accident." As Donald walked away, James felt the weight of the past months pressing down on him. What had started as a quest for dignity and justice had evolved into something darker, a calculated dismantling of William Blackwell's empire and reputation. The question that had haunted him for weeks resurfaced with fresh urgency. At what point did justified retribution become destructive vengeance? His phone rang. It was Nadia, calling with news that would force him to confront that question sooner than he expected. The Attorney General's press conference sent shockwaves through the business community. Standing before a sea of microphones, AG Lydia Cortez laid out the charges against William Blackwell and 4 Blackwell Properties executives, including Donald Parker. Fraud, racketeering, bribery of public officials, falsification of records, intellectual property theft, and most significantly, criminal conspiracy related to Francis Brenner's accident, Cortez announced, cameras flashing incessantly. This case represents one of the most comprehensive patterns of corporate malfeasance this office has encountered. Mr. Blackwell used his company not just to build real estate, but to construct a web of corruption that undermined fair competition, endangered public safety, and ultimately led to violence against a private citizen. James watched the broadcast from his office, Nadia sitting beside him. As Cortez detailed the roles of whistleblowers and evidence providers, James's name was mentioned specifically as a victim of intellectual property theft who had cooperated with investigators. "You've made it," Nadia noted as James's phone immediately began buzzing with messages and calls. "Public vindication," James murmured, silencing his phone. "It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like watching a building collapse." "A building built on a rotten foundation," Nadia reminded him. "William Blackwell did this to himself. With my help," James added quietly. "I laid the charges and lit the fuse." Having second thoughts? James considered her question seriously. "Not about exposing William's corruption. That needed to happen. But I'm questioning how far I was willing to go. How much this has consumed me since Montana." "Justified anger isn't something to apologize for," Nadia said, squeezing his shoulder. "You stood up to a man who assaulted you, betrayed your trust, and targeted your family." "I know." James nodded slowly. "But there's a fine line between justice and obsession. I've been walking it for months." Their conversation was interrupted by James's assistant. "Mr. Brenner, Maxine Blackwell is here to see you. Should I send her in?" James hesitated for a moment before deciding. "Yes." Nadia stood to leave, though her concern was evident. "Want me to stay?" "No," James replied. "I think we need to talk alone." Maxine entered, looking nothing like the polished socialite or the angry wife of previous encounters. Dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, she carried herself with a weariness that spoke of sleepless nights and hard decisions. "I didn't think you'd see me," she said, remaining standing even when James gestured toward a chair. "I wasn't sure I would either," he admitted. "But here we are. I saw the press conference." Maxine's voice was rough with emotion. "Dad's being arraigned tomorrow. His lawyer says he'll probably face serious prison time." "I'm sorry it came to this," James said, surprised to find he meant it. "Despite everything, I know he's still your father. The man they described today, the one who ordered someone to hurt your father. That's not the dad I thought I knew." Tears welled in her eyes. "I've been so blind, James. So willfully, stupidly blind." "When did you figure it out?" James asked gently. "About your father. About the kind of business he really ran." "Parts of it. I'd always suspected," Maxine admitted, finally sinking into a chair. "The way certain problems would conveniently disappear, how competitors would suddenly abandon projects. But I convinced myself that's just how business works at that level." "And Donald?" She flushed with shame. "That was different. Complicated. Or was it love?" "God, no." Maxine laughed bitterly. "It was about status, security. Donald was Dad's chosen successor, the son he never had. Being with him meant staying at the center of Dad's world, even at the cost of our marriage." "I didn't think it would cost that much," she said quietly. "I thought you'd never find out. That we could all just continue in our assigned roles. You, the talented architect married into the Blackwell family. Me, the loyal daughter carrying on a legacy. What changed?" James asked, searching her face for traces of the woman he once loved. "Your father's accident," Maxine said without hesitation. "When I found out Dad might have been involved, that he'd actually hurt someone just to get back at you, something broke inside me. I realized there was no line he wouldn't cross." James nodded slowly, processing her words. "The AG mentioned cooperating witnesses. Donald claimed you've been helping the investigation for the past 2 weeks." She nodded. "He's right. Dad still thinks I'm gathering information from his office to help his defense." She paused, her voice strained. "I recorded conversations, copied files, told investigators where to look for evidence of bribes." "That must have been difficult," James acknowledged, genuinely moved by the pain she was trying to hide. "It was the only thing I could do," Maxine said simply. "The only way to finally choose right over easy." They sat in silence, the weight of their shared history and diverging paths settling heavily between them. "What happens now?" James asked at last. "The divorce finalizes next week," Maxine reminded him. "After that, I don't know. Dad's companies will be sold off to pay restitution. The Blackwell name is toxic in this town. I'll probably leave. Start over somewhere people don't know me. And Donald? He's cutting a deal from what I hear. Limited jail time in exchange for his testimony against Dad. Her expression hardened slightly. He turned on Dad even faster than I did. Loyalty was never his strong suit. James couldn't help but offer a small, ironic smile. No honor among thieves. Something like that. Maxine stood to leave, then hesitated at the door. For what it's worth, James, I am sorry. Not just for the affair or for siding with Dad that day in Montana, but for never really seeing you. For not understanding who you were, or what actually mattered. Thank you for saying that, James replied quietly. I hope you find what you're looking for, Maxine. Truly. After she left, James sat alone in his office as dusk settled over the city. The press conference, Maxine's visit, the upcoming arraignment, it all should have felt like victory. Instead, he found himself questioning the path he'd taken and the man he'd become during these months of calculated retribution. His phone rang, his mother calling from the hospital where his father was having a follow-up appointment. How's Dad doing? James asked immediately. Better than expected, Rena replied. The doctor says he's healing well ahead of schedule. That's good news, James. Her voice softened. We saw the press conference. Your father wants to speak with you. After a rustling sound, Francis's voice came on the line. Son, you there? I'm here, Dad. How are you feeling? Never mind that. Francis dismissed the question. I need to know something. Are you okay with how this has all played out? James considered lying, then decided against it. I don't know. I set out to protect myself and my work, to stand up against people who thought they could walk all over me. But somewhere along the way, it became darker. Revenge is like that, his father said sagely. Starts out feeling like justice, ends up feeling like poison. The question is, what do you do now? What do you mean? William Blackwell's going to jail, Francis stated flatly. His company's falling apart. His reputation's destroyed. You've won, son. Complete victory. The question is whether you can show mercy in victory. Mercy? James repeated, surprised. After what he did to you. Especially after that? Mercy isn't about whether the other person deserves it, Francis insisted. It's about who you choose to be when you have all the power. His father's words lingered with James long after they hung up. As he replayed the events of recent months in his mind, he saw how carefully he'd planned, how methodically he'd dismantled William Blackwell's empire and reputation. He'd achieved everything he set out to do and more. So why did victory feel so hollow? The media went crazy over William Blackwell's arrest, way more than James expected. News vans crowded outside the courthouse, filming the powerful real estate mogul being led away in handcuffs after bail was denied. Financial shows ran special reports about the fall of Blackwell's empire, showing crashing stock prices and the impact on other businesses. James deliberately avoided making public statements, declining all interview requests and instructing his firm's employees to do the same. Instead, he threw himself into his current projects, working with an intensity that even concerned Nadia. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours? She asked, finding him still hunched over his drafting table well past midnight. I sleep enough, James replied, not looking up from his drawings. The Henderson project deadline isn't for 3 weeks, Nadia pointed out. This obsessive work schedule isn't necessary. It keeps my mind occupied. From what? Celebrating your victory? When James didn't respond, she sighed and pulled up a chair. Talk to me, James. You've won. William's facing years in prison. Donald is scrambling to save himself with a plea deal. The divorce is finalizing tomorrow. This should be your moment of vindication, James. Finally, he set down his pencil. That's just it. I got everything I wanted. William exposed and punished, my reputation and work protected, even Maxine finally acknowledging her part in all of it. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. But it doesn't feel like I thought it would. How did you think it would feel? I don't know, satisfying, healing. Instead, you feel hollow, Nadia supplied. Because revenge never actually repairs what was broken in the first place. James nodded slowly. My father said something similar about mercy being a choice you make when you have all the power. Francis Brenner, closet philosopher. Nadia smiled. He's not wrong. So what now? William's legal troubles aren't going away no matter what I do. The company is hemorrhaging value. Clients are fleeing. Projects are stalled mid-construction. Hundreds of employees who had nothing to do with William's corruption are losing their livelihoods. None of that is your responsibility, Nadia reminded him. Isn't it? I set this in motion. I pursued it relentlessly, even after getting everything I originally wanted. James stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. At what point did justified self-defense become something else? The question hung in the air between them, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. The following day, James attended the final divorce hearing alone. Maxine appeared similarly unaccompanied. both of them choosing to end their marriage without the spectacle of attorneys or family members present. The proceedings were brief, the judge confirming their agreement on all terms before granting the divorce. In the courthouse hallway afterward, they stood awkwardly, 7 years of marriage reduced to a few signatures on legal documents. So that's it, Maxine said. Finally, a clean break. That's it, James agreed. Where will you go now? Seattle, I think. My mother's sister lives there, the only family member who never bought into the Blackwell mythology. She's offered me a place to stay until I figure things out. Maxine hesitated. What about you? Still planning to focus on sustainable architecture? That's the plan, James confirmed. Though I'm considering some pro bono work as well. Affordable housing designs, community centers, that sort of thing. You always wanted to do that. Maxine remembered, a flash of genuine regret crossing her features. Before I convinced you to focus on more profitable projects. We all make choices, James said, without accusation. The important thing is recognizing when we need to make different ones. They parted with a handshake that felt both too formal and too intimate, final contact between two people who had once shared everything but had now become strangers. James spent the afternoon visiting his father, who was recovering at home under Rena's watchful care. Francis looked better than he had in the hospital, color returning to his face and some of his natural vitality evident in his movements despite the lingering pain. Did the divorce go through? Francis asked as they sat in the backyard, enjoying the rare autumn sunshine. It's done, James confirmed. Maxine's moving to Seattle to start over. And how are you feeling about it all? James considered the question carefully. Relieved it's over. Sad about what might have been. Uncertain about what comes next. Normal feelings after the end of a marriage, Francis assured him. Even under these circumstances. But there's more to it. I've been thinking about what you said, James admitted. About mercy being a choice when you have all the power. And I'm trying to figure out what that means practically. William's facing criminal charges regardless of what I do. The company is collapsing. People who had nothing to do with his corruption are losing their jobs. Projects are stalled. Communities are being affected. Francis nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like you're seeing the broader impact now beyond your personal vendetta. I am, James acknowledged. And I'm wondering if there's something I should do about it. Like what? I don't know yet, James admitted honestly. But I know I don't want this to be the end of the story. Just destruction and punishment. Nothing built from the ashes. His father smiled with evident pride. Now that sounds like the son we raised. The seed of an idea took root that afternoon, growing clearer as James drove back to his office. By evening, he had outlined a concept that felt simultaneously radical and obvious. He called Nora, asking her to meet him first thing in the morning. When she arrived, coffee in hand, James was already at the conference table, surrounded by preliminary sketches and legal documents. You look like you actually slept, she observed, setting a cup in front of him. 6 full hours, James confirmed. And I had a revelation. Should I be worried? Not worried. Intrigued. James gestured to the materials spread across the table. What would you say if I told you I'm considering trying to acquire Blackwell Properties' stalled development projects? Nora nearly choked on her coffee. I'd say you've lost your mind. Those projects are toxic assets right now tied up in legal complications, financing in disarray, subcontractors fleeing. Exactly, James nodded. Which means they'll be available at pennies on the dollar once the bankruptcy proceedings begin. The banks want to recover something rather than nothing. Even at fire sale prices, we don't have that kind of capital, Nora pointed out. We're a successful architecture firm, not a development company. We wouldn't do it alone, James explained, sliding a document toward her. I've been researching community development corporations, public-private partnerships, sustainable investment funds. There's a way to structure this that brings in multiple stakeholders, local governments interested in completing projects that would otherwise become urban blight, ethical investors looking for social impact opportunities, community organizations representing the people actually affected by these developments. You want to transform Blackwell's luxury developments into what, exactly? Mixed income, sustainable communities, James said, growing animated. Taking what William intended as exclusive enclaves for the wealthy and reimagining them as vibrant neighborhoods that benefit entire communities. Affordable housing alongside market rate units. Green spaces. Community centers. Local businesses instead of chain stores. Nora studied him carefully. This isn't just about business, is it? This is your version of mercy. Maybe, James admitted. Not erasing what William did wrong, but creating something positive from the wreckage. Transforming rather than just destroying. It's ambitious, Nora acknowledged. Possibly impossible. But worth trying, James insisted. William built an empire based on exclusion, corruption, and intimidation. What if we could build something better from its ruins? Over the following weeks, James assembled a team of advisors, legal experts in bankruptcy proceedings, community development specialists, sustainable finance consultants. He reached out to city officials and communities where Blackwell's projects stood half-completed, proposing partnerships that would complete the construction while radically reimagining the end result. The responses ranged from skeptical interest to enthusiastic support. Local governments, wary of abandoned construction sites turning into safety hazards and eyesores, were particularly receptive. Community organizations, initially suspicious of James's motives, grew cautiously supportive when he invited them to participate in redesigning the projects to meet local needs. As the plan took shape, James received an unexpected call from Thomas Hammond, the real estate commissioner whose investigation had initiated Williams' downfall. "I've been hearing about your proposal for the Blackwell properties," Hammond said, without preamble. "It's unorthodox, to say the least. But necessary," James argued. "These projects will either become community assets or community liabilities. There's no middle ground." "I agree," Hammond surprised him by saying, "which is why I'd like to meet to discuss how my office might help facilitate the regulatory aspects." "If you're serious about this." "Completely serious," James confirmed, "and grateful for any support you can provide." The meeting with Hammond led to further discussions with banking regulators, zoning officials, and affordable housing advocates. The initial concept expanded and evolved, integrating insights from experts across various disciplines. What began as James's personal project transformed into a collaborative effort involving dozens of stakeholders united by a shared vision of transformation. 6 weeks after Williams' arraignment, as bankruptcy proceedings for Blackwell Properties formally began, James presented his comprehensive proposal to the bankruptcy trustee and major creditors. The plan involved creating a new entity, Restoration Community Development, that would acquire select Blackwell projects, refinance them through a combination of private investment and public funding, and complete them according to redesigned plans emphasizing accessibility, sustainability, and community benefit. "This is unorthodox," the lead bankruptcy attorney noted after James's presentation. "So was the scale of fraud that created the situation," James countered. "Conventional approaches won't address the magnitude of the problem. Your proposal would require creditors to accept significant write-downs on their loans," a bank representative pointed out. "Compared to what they'd recover from abandoned projects tied up in years of litigation, this offers certainty and partial recovery, now plus positive public relations for supporting community redevelopment." The discussion continued for hours, delving into financial details, legal structures, and implementation timelines. By the end, while nothing was formally approved, James had secured agreement for a more detailed feasibility study and ongoing consideration of the proposal. As he left the meeting, mentally exhausted but cautiously optimistic, James found Nadia waiting in the lobby. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. "Better than expected," James admitted. "They didn't dismiss it outright, which is the first hurdle. Now comes the hard work of proving it can actually succeed." "You look more alive than I've seen you in months," Nadia observed as they walked to the parking garage. "This project is healing something in you, isn't it?" James considered her question thoughtfully. "I think it's helping me redefine victory, moving from tearing down what was wrong to building something better." Speaking of William, Nadia's tone shifted. "Have you heard the latest? He's offering to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence." "Can't say I'm surprised," James replied. "Self-preservation seems to be the Blackwell family specialty." "Except for Maxine," Nadia pointed out. "From what I hear, she's cooperating without asking for anything in return." James nodded, a flicker of respect for his ex-wife's choices warming him unexpectedly. "People can surprise you." "You've certainly surprised me," Nadia admitted. 6 months ago, I thought this would end with William's destruction. I never imagined you trying to salvage something positive from the wreckage." "Neither did I," James said honestly. "But at some point, I realized I had a choice: either be defined by what happened in Montana or define myself by what I chose to do next." "And you chose the harder path," Nadia observed. "The more interesting one," James corrected with a small smile. 1 year after the Montana incident, James stood on the observation platform overlooking what had once been Blackwell Properties' most ambitious luxury development, Riverside Heights. Originally conceived as an exclusive enclave for the wealthy, the project was now being transformed under the guidance of Restoration Community Development into something entirely different. Where William had planned a private golf course, community gardens, and public green spaces were now taking shape. The luxury penthouse floors had been redesigned as mixed-income housing, with units reserved for essential workers and families displaced by gentrification. The ground-floor retail spaces, once intended for high-end boutiques, were now being converted into areas for local businesses, a community health clinic, and educational facilities. "Impressive progress," observed Mayor Walton, who had joined James for the site visit. Hard to believe this project was a half-abandoned construction site a year ago. We've had extraordinary cooperation from the city, James acknowledged. The expedited permitting process made all the difference. Self-interest, the mayor admitted candidly. Leaving this property derelict would have been a disaster for the surrounding neighborhoods. Your proposal offered a solution that addressed multiple needs simultaneously. They descended from the platform to tour the construction areas, where crews worked steadily to implement the revised designs. James greeted workers by name, having made a point of knowing the people bringing his vision to life. The first residential units will be ready for occupancy next month, James explained as they walked. We're prioritizing families displaced by the original development for the first phase of affordable units. Poetic justice, the mayor commented. People pushed out by Blackwell's project now finding homes in its reimagined version. James nodded, reflecting on how far things had come in a year. Restoration Community Development had successfully acquired 3 of Blackwell's stalled projects, with negotiations progressing on 2 more. The innovative financing model blending traditional investment, social impact funds, and public partnerships had drawn national attention as a potential blueprint for similar initiatives elsewhere. William Blackwell had ultimately accepted a plea agreement, receiving a 15-year sentence for fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy charges related to Francis Brenner's accident. Donald Parker, after extensive cooperation with prosecutors, was serving a 5-year sentence. The Blackwell corporate empire had been dismantled through bankruptcy proceedings and regulatory actions, with its assets sold off to satisfy creditors and legal claims. After the mayor departed, James continued walking the site alone, making notes on construction progress and design adjustments. His phone rang, Nadia calling from their downtown office. "How's the site visit going?" she asked when he answered. "On schedule for once," James replied with satisfaction. "The East Residential Tower is nearly complete. The commercial space is taking shape nicely. Good timing. The Westridge Community Group is here now, reviewing the preliminary designs for their neighborhood project," Nadia said. "They're enthusiastic but have some concerns about the community center's location. Tell them I'll be there in an hour to discuss alternatives," James promised. Their input is essential to getting this right. After ending the call, James made his way to a quieter part of the site, an area being developed as a memorial garden dedicated to victims of corporate fraud and exploitation. The idea had been Maxine's suggestion, offered during one of their infrequent but increasingly cordial conversations. She had continued to surprise him over the past year. Since moving to Seattle, Maxine had begun collaborating with consumer protection advocates, using her insider knowledge of real estate development to help identify potential fraud and predatory practices. They spoke every few months, not as friends, but as two people bound by a shared history and a mutual understanding of a painful chapter that was now, at last, behind them. James's parents had fully recovered, both physically and emotionally, from the trauma of the accident. Francis had become an unexpected advisor to Restoration Community Development, his practical wisdom and ethical clarity offering invaluable guidance during complicated decisions. Rena, meanwhile, had organized a support network for families displaced by development projects, helping them navigate the system to secure housing within the reimagined communities. As James prepared to leave the construction site, a familiar figure approached from the parking area: Sylvia Velez, the whistleblower whose testimony had been crucial in bringing Williams' corruption to light. Now, she served as a community liaison for restoration, ensuring transparency and accountability in all aspects of the redevelopment process. "Just the person I wanted to see," she called as she approached. "The Resident Advisory Committee has some suggestions for the rooftop spaces in Building C." "Let me guess," James smiled. "More garden plots, fewer lounge areas." "You're learning," Sylvia confirmed with approval. "They're passionate about food security and teaching kids where food comes from." "Make it happen," James decided without hesitation. The design should reflect their priorities, not our assumptions. They walked together toward the parking area, discussing implementation details. As they reached James's car, Sylvia hesitated. "I got a letter from William yesterday," she said quietly. "From prison?" James stiffened slightly. "He wanted to apologize." "Supposedly." Her expression showed deep skepticism. "He claims he's had some kind of spiritual awakening behind bars, that he sees the error of his ways." "Do you believe him?" Sylvia considered the question carefully. "I believe prison has humbled him. But whether that's genuine remorse or just him adjusting to his new reality, that's harder to say." James nodded, understanding her uncertainty. He had received a similar letter 6 months earlier, pages of Williams' explanation and apology, written in careful handwriting so unlike his formerly bold signature. James had read it twice and filed it away without responding, still unsure how to process the apparent transformation of a man who once seemed incapable of acknowledging his own wrongdoing. What did you do with your letter? Sylvia asked. Kept it, James admitted. Someday, I might know what to do with it. Not yet. That's where I am too, she agreed. Some wounds take longer to heal than others. After Sylvia departed, James sat in his car for a moment, reflecting on the journey of the past year. The man who had fled Montana, burning with humiliation and rage, felt like a different person now, someone he recognized, but no longer fully inhabited. The work of transformation, both of Blackwell's failed projects and of himself, had changed him in ways he was still discovering. His phone rang again. It was Francis Brenner. Hey, Dad. Everything okay? Better than okay, Francis replied enthusiastically. The Community Center Committee approved your latest designs unanimously. They're especially excited about the workshop spaces for teaching practical skills. That was your suggestion, James reminded him. The idea of creating spaces where retired tradespeople could pass on their skills to younger generations. Just building bridges between people who need each other, Francis replied modestly. Speaking of which, your mother wanted me to remind you about dinner on Sunday. She's making your favorite pot roast. Wouldn't miss it, James promised. After ending the call, he began the drive back to his office, his mind already shifting to the afternoon's meetings and design reviews. As he passed another former Blackwell property, one not yet acquired by restoration, but still standing, abandoned, traffic slowed. Its partially completed structure loomed as a reminder of work yet to be done. James made a mental note to revisit the feasibility studies for that site. One project at a time, one building at a time, one community at a time. The work of reconstruction continued, more challenging, but ultimately more fulfilling than the pursuit of retribution had ever been. The final meeting of the day ran longer than expected, with community representatives passionately advocating for specific features in the Westridge project. James listened more than he spoke, having learned that the best solutions emerged when those most affected by the outcome had the strongest voice in the process. By the time he left the office, evening had settled over the city. He drove home to his modest house in a mixed-income neighborhood, a deliberate choice. After selling the larger home he had shared with Maxine, the smaller space suited his simpler lifestyle, now focused more on meaningful work than on status or appearances. As James unlocked his front door, he noticed an envelope that had been slipped underneath. Inside was a newspaper clipping, an article profiling restoration community development from a national business magazine, highlighting the innovative model as a potential blueprint for addressing abandoned development projects nationwide. A yellow sticky note was attached, written in Maxine's handwriting. You found a better way. I'm proud of what you're building. James placed the clipping on his desk beside the architectural awards his firm had earned for sustainable design and community impact. The professional recognition mattered, but the simple acknowledgement from someone who had witnessed his lowest moments and seen his deliberate choice to rebuild carried its own significance. Later that evening, as James reviewed plans for the next day's site meeting, his thoughts drifted back to the journey from that mountain site in Montana to the present. The humiliation had been real, the betrayal painful, the anger justified. But at each crossroads, the path forward had been his choice. With every decision, he was shaping not just buildings and communities, but also his own character and legacy. William had slapped him and demanded he clean expensive shoes. Maxine had insisted he apologize for an accident. The old wounds had healed not through revenge, but through the far more challenging and rewarding process of creating something valuable from the wreckage. James closed his design portfolio and walked to the window, looking out at the city where his reimagined projects were steadily taking shape. The work was far from complete, both the physical construction and his own internal reconstruction. But for the first time since Montana, he felt fully confident in the direction of both. The price of dignity had been steep, but its worth was proving immeasurable. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.